What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and in this video today, I think we've got interesting topic. This is where, I know a lot of us see this out there, and I know I've probably been guilty of it myself, but sometimes, we see books that have asking prices on them that are very high, and there can be different reasons. I always say, if it's whoever's book it is, they are allowed to ask whatever they want for it. However, if you are asking a very high price, don't be surprised if you have some people criticize that asking price, make comments, that kind of thing. It can, I know, like I said, I don't think that that's right. I think that, if it's your book, you can ask whatever you want. You are not beholden to last sale, any of that kind of stuff. The FMV that's calculated on Go Collect, the 90-day average on GPA, like none of that. Like you can ask whatever you want, because if every book sold for the average of the last whatever sales, prices would always be the same. They would never go up. They would never go down. And we know that doesn't happen. So I decided to make this video because I saw a post on one of the Facebook groups that I'm in recently. And that post has already been removed. And I think it's because the person was getting a lot of very negative feedback. You can tell when that's happening, when there are a lot of the little laugh emojis underneath the post. It means that people are generally laughing at what you're saying. And sometimes that's good. But in this case, not so much, because this was a sales post. And I've got this Amazing Fantasy 15 up here because it was this book, but it was a little different. The person had purchased this book, and they had gotten a donor copy or something from somewhere. They'd gotten a centerfold from somewhere, because this book is missing the centerfold. That's why it's a 0.5. They married the centerfold, they resubmitted it, and they got a 3.0 green label, which then said centerfold married, and they were asking $25,000 for that book. And again, it's their book. They can ask whatever they want. But clearly the group that he was posting this in was not very happy with that asking price, and felt that it was unreasonable, because he was kind of getting it into it with the admin on the site a little bit, and it just it wasn't looking great. So I'm not surprised that post had been deleted. But when I saw that, I just immediately, if you know the pricing of this book right now, I was like, there's no way that book is going to ever sell for that price. And so it all depends. Sometimes people list books just to have them up there. They have no intention of selling them. He seemed like he wanted to sell this book, but he was trying to get out of it for basically what he had into it. And he said that in there. He's like, I'm into this 25,000. I'm firm on 25,000. And this is the reality of selling comics. No one cares what you're into it for. That doesn't have any bearing on what that book is going to sell for. If a shop buys a bunch of comics from a collector for 10 cents on average a piece, and there's an Amazing Fantasy 15 in there, think they're giving you that book for 15 cents or 10 cents or 20 cents? No, they're going to charge you $20,000. It's like, it doesn't matter what they paid for it. It's what it's worth. And it goes the opposite way too. If you paid too much for something, that doesn't mean someone else is going to come in and hold your bag. And unfortunately, you can see the date that this book was purchased. This book was purchased on June 6th, 2021. This was the fervor of the comic boom. This was, it had just started to kick off in May. June, it was in full effect. And, people were just thinking, I was there too. I was buying and selling books at that point too. And it just really seemed like, maybe if I don't buy this book now, and I'm guessing this is the thought process. If I don't buy this book now, I'm never going to be able to get it, because the prices are just going to keep going up, and I need to lock in a copy now, or I'm going to get priced out and I will never own that book. And everybody says oh, it's so obvious. It's like, yeah, if it was obvious, why were so many people, a lot of us included, buying books at those prices? It's because it wasn't obvious. If you're in the middle of it, it becomes obvious after the fact, looking back, looking at the price changes, the price drops, all of that. But when you're in the moment, and comics, collectibles, all of that, they're very emotional. and it's something that you've been hoping to get, your whole life or for 5 years or 10 years, and all of a sudden it's starting to run away from you. People start making decisions very emotionally, and it's understandable. And prices went up very, very fast. And that's how you can see here a point 0.5 that sold for $21,600. This was actually the second highest price ever paid for a point 0.5. So if we go to GPA, we can see that sale here. This was it was this one right here. So 0.5, it was this sale, 21,600. There were, then 2023, we had some $11,000 sales, $13,000 sales. It's come back down, right? Like this book now is going around 12,000 to 14,000, somewhere in that range. I mean, a 0.5 is still a very expensive book, but it's not 21,000. The highest price ever paid was 24,000. That was this one, also in 2021. That was in August of 2021. And there was this huge peak sale right here. And you can see this book, it's continued to generally trend up over time. It's like $12,000 now, but that big peak sale, it'll probably hit 24,000 at some point, but not for many, many years. It might be 10 years, 12 years before that 0.5 hits that type of number. Maybe a little earlier than that, but that wouldn't be unreasonable to think that. So it could be that value at some point, but not for a while. So I've dealt with this too, especially with a lot of Silver Age and Bronze Age. Now I have transitioned largely into Golden Age, but I still own a fair amount of Silver and Bronze Age comics. And generally when I sell them, I am losing money on them because at this point, they're mostly books that I probably bought in 2021 or 2022, something like that. And so, yeah, you take a loss. It is what it is. It's like, you can't just because you paid a bunch more for that book doesn't mean that somebody else is going to be willing to pay a bunch more for that book. Now, the difference with different eras is the scarcity of the book. And so that's why when people have something like an Action 1 or a Suspense 3 or a Detective Comics 27, they can, in theory, put very high prices on those books. And someone very likely will come along and pay that price because now you're having to deal with when's the next time that book's going to come up for sale. Maybe I don't want to wait 6 months, a year, 2 years to be able to get that book. When it's scarcity, that can play another role. Amazing Fantasy 15 is not scarce by any stretch. So if we just jump up and look at, the census, for example, just to kind of see that, you can see like just Universals, almost 2,600, 2 more. And I'm sure those will come in probably in the next couple of weeks. We'll be at 2,600. Now, granted, there's some resubmissions in here and all of that. So the census isn't perfect, but it gives you a reasonable idea. Total graded, almost 4,000. Now there's a bunch of restores. There's some signature series, some qualifieds, but there's almost 4,000 copies out there. If we go over to eBay and you search for Amazing Fantasy 15, 1962, some of these you're getting individual pages, but there are a ton of Amazing Fantasy 15s. Some of these are these like gold foil ones, but a ton of these Amazing Fantasy 15s available at any time. And so it is not a rare book. And so you can't really try to get that price that's well outside of what the book is selling for right now. Now, a lot of times, a lot of these prices will be very high. I mean, like, look at this, like 40,000 for a 2.0. It's never going to happen. Like it's just like, maybe they're hoping they've got a best offer turned on, but a 2.0 is like around a $20,000 book right now. And, here, $1 million for a 7.0. I mean, there's always going to be some of these like crazy, 50,000 for a 4.0. We've had 4.0s going around, I think like 35 now, 32 maybe even, but yeah, like 35. And so just because you ask that price doesn't mean you're going to get it, especially because these books come up at auction fairly regularly. In auction, you're going to generally realize what that current price is. And so most of the time, people just wouldn't even bother with this, if it's really overpriced like that. And they're just going to wait for an auction and they'll pick up one at Heritage or Comic Connect or Comic Link or Hakes or My Comic Shop or whatever, like when one comes up for an auction. And so that's the other thing you really have to think about when you're pricing out a book is that how rare is that book? Is there somebody that's going to be willing to pay, more for it because of that rarity, because of the time? And with Amazing Fantasy 15, that just isn't the case. But the thing I wanted to talk about a little bit here too was pricing with this book. Like, what would I actually think this book would sell for with the 3.0 complete green label, qualified book. And so the way that I would approach that is I'd start with the 0.5, right? So the base value of that book is the 0.5. At least it's going to be worth that. And so if we go down and look at the 0.5, we can see here July one sold for 12,000. We had, another 12,000 here. We had 13,000 in August. I mean, probably 12 to 14,000, somewhere in the 12 to 13 and a half is approximately where a 0.5 Amazing Fantasy 15 is going to go. And this is a pretty decent looking one. It's got some Marvel chipping, but the fact that it did get a 3.0 once it had that centerfold married, it looks about like a 3.0. I mean, it's not a beat up 0.5. It's, the colors are really nice on it. It's, it doesn't have any big pieces missing from the front, anything like that. I mean, let's take a look at the back. Yeah, I mean, back of the book looks nice too. No big pieces missing from the back. So it's a solid looking 0.5. So it probably would command the higher end of that range, like 13,500 is that base price. Now you've got one that is complete. I mean, it's a piece from another book, but it is a complete copy. So that adds something to it. What does a 3.0 go for in a Universal? I mean, you can see the last sale, 27,000. We had one 25,000, 24,000. We had 3.5 go for 25, 22. And so that's where like a 3.0 to a 3.5 is probably around 25,000 complete right now, Universal. And so that's what I'm saying. Like the green label married, there is no way that book is going to sell for 25,000. Nobody is going to buy that. It's just somebody will just wait for an auction and they'll get it cheaper and they'll get a Universal copy. Like no one is going to buy that book in a 3.0 and a qualified for that price. So what does that make it worth? I mean, we can look at what some qualified books have sold for. Because I think there was actually one that was a little abnormally high that was in here, but they don't sell as often, so you're not going to have as recent of sales for these. But if we keep scrolling down here, we'll see if we can find one. Here's a married cover 2.0 that sold for 12,000. I mean, that a married cover I would call a little worse qualification than a married centerfold. Here we had a 5th wrap married for 13.5, but that was over a year ago. Staples replaced 1.8, 12,000. I thought there was one more in here somewhere, but I don't see where it is. I don't know. Maybe I saw it somewhere else, but or maybe it was a little higher up. Let's just check. We'll keep looking here. So here was a 6.0, 2 center wraps missing, incomplete. So it's not even a complete book. It's just getting a qualified 6 for 20,000. So, and I feel like that's kind of on the high side, and especially because this was in February of this year. So I think that would probably sell for less now because the book has come down a little more since then. So to me, I think having that centerfold counts for something. It's a complete book. So I think it's worth more than 13,500. I don't think it's worth 20,000. I think it's probably somewhere in between. I would say probably about 17,000. If that book came up for auction today, this book came up for auction today on the open market, and it was a 3.0 qualified, centerfold married, solid looking copy, I think that book is going to sell for around $17,000. Now, private sale, like then you got to think about that too. Like if it's 17,000, somebody's going to say like, hey, you don't have all those fees that you might have with Heritage or Hakes or Comic Link or eBay or whatever. Like how about 16,000? Because in reality, if you took 16,000 with no fees, you're still taking home more than if you made 17,000 in one of those auctions. So that's the other thing you got to think about too. So a private sale, I mean, I could see it going under that 16,000, 15,500. And, you know, the asking price was 25 grand firm. And so, I mean, that's the thing. Like, yeah, it sucks that, you know, they paid 21,600 for this, that they had some donor copy, that they had to have the work done on the book because they said they had it pressed and cleaned, and, you know, the marrying process regraded, which 4% of value on like a whatever CGC charged them, 15,000 or 20,000. They paid another $800 there. Taxes, all that. I mean, they're into this book, probably what he said, like about 25 grand. And yeah, he's going to lose $10,000 when he sells this book. And that sucks. But he bought the book at like peak comic boom price, the second highest price ever paid for this. And this book has retreated in every grade. I mean, take a look at, let's look at some of these. let's look at a higher grade copy. Like, how do you think the Ado buyer feels that paid $560,000 in 2021? Last sale 2023, 312,000. Yeah, you lost $250,000 in value in that book. I mean, yeah, that's what happened when they paid that price. It's not just the 0.5s, it's across the board. You look at any grade, they all had these peaks during the comic boom and they're falling. I mean, it doesn't matter which one it is. It's the 5.0s, it's the 7.0s, it's the 8.0s. I mean, peak during the comic boom and falling. And so you just got to accept that. I mean, especially with silver and bronze and modern. I mean, I've talked about Golden Age is still going very strong. And I'm not just saying that because those are the books I buy and sell. Like I've been watching that. It's, it's one thing I've really liked about Golden Age. It's been very stable. That's a big positive for it. Silver, bronze, and modern, they have corrected significantly because there are so many more copies of those books out there. And so there's always competition. And that drives down price. I mean, I showed that on eBay. I mean, tons of copies available at any given time. And this is one of the biggest Silver Age books. It's not like this is some super common one. I mean, this is one of the bigger Silver Age books, and there's still tons of copies out there available. So you just got to consider that when you're pricing. If you really want to sell the book, if this person's listening, they really want to sell it. If they want to sell it privately, like maybe they can get that 17, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tried to get it at like 16 or 15.5, and that would be reasonable. That would be a pretty reasonable ask for what is effectively a 0.5. Just has that, that centerfold married in there. And how much is that worth? And that's, up for some debate. But just thought that this was an interesting one because, I know people are always talking about like, oh, those slabs aren't selling or whatever isn't selling or something like that. And it's like, well, prices like that, it makes sense. Like no one's going to pay that price. If you want to sell the book, you got to price it appropriately. And if you don't want to sell the book, that's fine. You can price it however you want. But no one's paying 25 grand for that book. But that's the video. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of thought process into how I would price that book. And, if you want to sell the books, got to price accordingly. We'll see you on the next one.